The first inequality we're going to look at in reference to how it affects BAME communities in particular is the idea of wealth inequalities. We know there are significant wealth inequalities in between white people and people from BAME communities. The question is, why do these inequalities exist? Now, we know that BAME people are far more likely to live in low-income households than white people. All right, and this applies all over the country, but it particularly applies, the differences are biggest in London and the north of England. Around 40% of people from ethnic minorities are currently living in poverty, and that's compared to just 25% of white people. So there's a huge disparity there. Now, you might think, well, is that because of the kind of different lifestyles that BAME people live? We know that BAME people are more likely to be lone parents. We know that they're likely to have a higher number of children, and they're more likely to be unemployed. And these are all factors that make it more likely that you're going to be living in poverty. However, even when we take these factors into account, there's still a massive disparity between the number of white people in poverty and the number of BAME people in poverty. An example of this: 70% of Bangladeshi families, that's families from Bangladeshi origin, so it could be people who've just come from Bangladesh, but more usually it's people whose parents have come or grandparents have come. 70% of those families in the UK are living in poverty, even though they're in work. Now, this is most likely due to the fact that 50% of Bangladeshi workers are paid at the minimum wage, so they're not paying enough to keep them out of poverty. We know that BAME people are much more likely to be paid at minimum wage or below. Now, collectivists would argue that this difference in wealth is due to what we call systemic inequality, and we've talked about systemic inequality before. This is where the system is set up to benefit the privileged and to disadvantage the underprivileged, and it's very difficult to move from unprivileged to privileged because of the way the system is set up. So we know that BAME people are less likely to be in high-paying jobs, less likely to be promoted, and they face racial bias in the hiring process. In a 2018 Guardian study, 43% of BAME people reported being overlooked for a work promotion in a way that felt unfair in the last 5 years. More than twice that of white people. Just 18% of white people felt that they were overlooked for a promotion in a way that felt unfair. So we can see there's a massive disparity there. And this cycle continues because of it. BAME people are much less likely to be in higher positions in companies, and less likely to be making that decision, and so we see this kind of cycle of prejudice and cycle of repression. Now, individualists would oppose this argument. They argue that these statistics exaggerate the problem. We know that the number of ethnic minority families living in poverty has decreased slightly over the last few years, so it's moving in the right direction, but it's moving very, very slowly. And they would argue that a large amount of this disparity is actually due to choice. That BAME people are less likely to be highly educated than white people. So if you're less likely to be highly educated, there are a lot of jobs that are just out of reach. Many, many jobs require a university degree as a kind of bare minimum standard. But this ignores the fact that due to systemic inequality, people from BAME backgrounds, they don't have the same access to university, the same access to high quality education as white people do. And so saying that, well, they're just choosing to be less well educated is basically wrong.